We've got Jeff Greenspan from Chattanooga, correct? Previously in New York City. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Terrific. Good to have you here, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
We're just going to chit chat for the next, 29 minutes or so about comedy stuff. How you doing today?
Okay. I'm okay. This whole comedy thing is a series of ups and downs. I'm in the middle right now. So
okay. All right. It's a real, it is a roller coaster.
I'm in between a high and a low right now.
It is. Okay. All right. Do you want to get into your high and low? We'll just, or is it too fresh? Okay. No. All right.
Hearing about other people's highs and lows is like hearing about people's dreams. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what this show is kind of about. And people do tune in, if you can believe it.
I believe it.
Yeah. So, good to have you here, Jeff. Why don't you let's back up. How'd you get into comedy in the first place? Look at this. We got people in the Carolinas welcoming you here.
Hello, Carolinas people. I'm just moving really quickly. I got into comedy. I had a career in advertising well before this. Apologies.
Okay.
Kind of grabbed it. And it was pretty good. I had a good career. I worked my way up to being the head of BuzzFeed. And I've
heard of it.
Yeah, it was a big thing in the day. And, I had worked at Facebook and I had a lot of the, outward trappings of what would be a successful career. But I was really, really unhappy. And even though I was making more and more money, it was still really not satisfying. And comedy is something I had really always wanted to do. And to be completely blunt, I was at a point in my life with depression and other issues that I was grappling with where I was kind of like, toying with not having a life. And then I thought, if you're at the point where you're ready to chuck it all in, everything's a Hail Mary pass, and you can just choose to disintegrate the life that you had rather than your actual life. So I started kind of getting myself involved in a lot of new things like Spanish classes, jiu-jitsu, stand-up comedy. I kind of started walking slowly away from the corporate life and the money, but I was a lot more, I felt like I was leading a more authentic life. So that's how I got into comedy. Cool. Why I stayed, I don't know.
All right. So you're like Neo in the Matrix, and they're sticking in the different disk drives. And then when it got to stand-up comedy, it got stuck in there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I took a bunch of those classes all at the same time because I was trying to, in my own way, with an additional, also I had a therapist and medication, but I was like, maybe I could start lighting up parts of my brain that weren't being, that were neglected before, which is why I took like these physical classes and language classes. And I was doing everything I could try to do to get to just away from the dark place that I had been. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Coming to the light, and then found some darkness in there as well. Sounds like as you've navigated the highs and lows.
There's even darkness in the light.
Yes. Amen, brother. I know what you're talking about.
And there's light in the dark. So hence comedy. Yeah.
So tell us about so you get into comedy. What was one of your early, just really exciting booking wins? Something that
a booking win?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what it was. It was really amazing. There's a club in New York City, Gotham Comedy Club, and they have it's mostly a bringer show. I think it's usually on Sundays or Mondays or Wednesdays. And, I did the bringer show and I brought people and I did well enough times that I, at some point didn't really need to bring, and I would just kind of go there. And, I would do it all the time, expecting nothing to happen. You get a 6-minute set. It's mostly people who have just started doing comedy. At that point, I'd been doing it maybe 3 years. And somebody in the audience had a slot to book on the English-speaking show of the French Comedy Festival in New York City and asked me to join. And so I got to be on that. But also they were filming a Netflix documentary at that show, and a piece of my stand-up got included in the documentary as well as part of my interview. So all these things happen from the show that, it's easy I know people who wave off bringers or they'll wave off any show. I'm like, well, you really never know who's going to be in the room. And there's a better chance that there's someone in the room when you're in a place like New York or a place like Gotham. But, there was countless days when nobody spoke to me. So that was a real win. And it showed that, that you got to trust the process.
And just show up, do the work. So let me ask you something about that. Did you or do you use that as a credit, the Netflix, and how do you navigate that?
I do in bios. Like in bios, I'll say, my comedy was featured in a Netflix documentary. Sometimes if someone asks if I'm about to go up, they'll say, do you have any credits? I try not to put it on posters or anything because it feels a little. I think the message you send when you say the Netflix logo is that you had a special or a feature.
I hear you.
But I know people who use credits. They're very creative in how they get to that tenuous connection. So it's a legit credit. It was a Netflix bought documentary, but I didn't have a Netflix special. So it really depends on where I am and how much fluffing my ego needs that week.
Right. Got it. Well, if you're trying to move tickets, maybe it's okay to fudge a little bit. And it's not exactly a lie. You've been on Netflix. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, that's neat. Talk to me about, so did you run shows in New York City? That seems like a very competitive place to run shows.
Well, there was a room that I had started in. Back then it was called the Climate Lounge on 7th Street in New York City. And there was an organization called Laughing Buddha that was running an open mic system. And I became friendly with the owner of that venue, and he started slowly trying to broaden the different people who would be producing in that room. And it's really hard to get anybody to come to a show in New York City. And in New York City, at the level that I was at, or just the open mic scene in general, it's very common to pay for your time. You'll have to buy yourself onto the mic for $5 or buy drinks. And sometimes they're also charging the audience for that too. But since the comedians were already accustomed to paying something, I think they were paying $7 at that place. I charged all the comics $5 to be on it. I picked everybody, but because I had this money, I was able to buy a round of drinks for the audience. Because I was giving the audience something, I could technically put ads in the job section of Craigslist. So I put ads in the job section of Craigslist that I was running a focus group for new jokes, and we would pay you with a beer. And that got a lot of people to show up. And because I picked everybody, and it wasn't just people off the street doing stand-up, it was somewhat curated. Everybody did really well. And at the end, we passed around a tip bucket where we were able to get the $5 and then some back. So I was able to give all the comedians back what they paid plus a few dollars, and we had a sold out room. And so I was doing that until the pandemic. And then I moved to Chattanooga.
That is amazing. It's like a flash mob almost.
Yeah, right.
For a comedy show. Oh my goodness. I've never heard of that. Yeah. Carolina is saying that is very clever. All right, let's hit with a quick interstitial here. We had a question going back to the work. Did you taper off work, or was it a clean break from the corporate grind?
It's not. I didn't make enough money for a clean break. You still have to taper. I try to have this job. I'm working on this joke about, you say you want to have enough FU money. So you can, but you never really know how many U's there are going to be to F. They're always making new ones. There's never enough money to just not work, at least for me. So I still freelance, but I try not to take any jobs. I mean, the types of jobs that I had at the level of pay that I was at are not 40 an hour a week jobs. They're 50, 60, 70 hour a week jobs. And you're thinking about it, even your off time, and it wouldn't really leave time to do stand up. So freelance felt and still is the way to go for me, at least, to be able to make some big punches of money. And then I might only be hired for 2 or 3 days a month, but sometimes that's enough just to get me by. I live in Chattanooga. It's not as expensive as New York.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What was the move like going from, what was comedy like when you got to Chattanooga compared to New York City?
Well, it was open. I mean, I was living in New York City. I was trapped in quarantine in a small apartment, and there were no shows. I mean, that's not true. There were shows in backyards. There were shows in the most suboptimal places you can imagine. And I appreciated everybody's gesture of let's make the best of it. But for me, having started late in comedy and having no idea how long the pandemic would last without a vaccine, I was like, I'm just going to go to a place where it seems like you can still do comedy. And Chattanooga was. There were depending, I don't know how people feel about this, but there were indoor shows, and there were,
Well, you haven't said when it was, so.
It was at the apex of this whole thing. It was, the whole thing was nonsense. I mean, I was like, but I was already prepared to die once. I'm prepared to die now. Yeah. So I was in Alabama in rooms where they were smoking indoors, and if you wore a mask, you'd get a side eye. So those are the rooms that I did comedy in, and I really enjoy comedy in the South. I got here by a crazy accident, but it's been good so far.
That's wild. Anything you particularly miss about comedy in New York City?
I miss the work ethic that the people you're surrounded by have. I mean, listen, it seems like it's all the same. Every scene is the same. You can just extrapolate it out and magnify it by 1,000. There are people in New York who don't write enough, or don't go up enough, or show up on coke, or show up on they're stoned, or they just didn't do the work, or they're not respectful to the other comics. That exists everywhere. But in a place like New York, where there's 5,000 comics, and if you just want, you're always going to find a big chunk of people who you can roll with. And in a city like Chattanooga, there are great comics here. There are fantastic comics who have decided that comedy's not for them, and they just do it. They dabble. There are comedians who are fantastic here, but they've just had kids and they can't come out as much. And then there are hobbyists. So in a small scene, if you've only got 40 people really doing it, you might only have 2 or 3 that will get on the road and get booked out of town and give you constructive feedback on your work and accept your feedback, colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah. People you respect and trust.
Yeah. Huh. But there's great people here, and the audiences that's the other thing. Like, I'm still, obviously I'm doing open mics in between shows, and there are real audiences there, sometimes 20, 30, 40 people. In New York City, that's an unheard of idea. That, you'd have to have 40 mentally ill people if they're going to an open mic,
right,
in New York City, when they can do anything they want.
Right.
But the other cool thing that is here that is not in New York is there are people here. It's happened to me, and I've seen it happen to other comics who just really love comedy. They have no desire to do comedy, and they follow comedians the way they would local bands. And they'll come up to you and they'll be like, hey, that joke, I remember when you did it a month ago, and now it's so much better. Or I like how or I don't like it because you did this, or they're noticing the changes. And that's not everybody, but that's nobody in New York City. The idea that you would have someone who would see you 4 or 5 times who wasn't a comic, so that you get an audience's perspective, or even talk to the audience or know who they are. It's been pretty great.
Do you ever get nervous repeating material with?
Yeah, I do. It's a problem. I host a show twice a month, and for better or for worse, maybe I should let someone. There's so little stage time that I take some for me.
Sure.
And sometimes I try to use the hosting set as a bit of an open mic, because the audience, 60% of that audience has been there before. Maybe not the week before, but they've been there before.
Yeah.
And I know at the beginning of the show who's been here before, and it's more of a thunderous applause that people have returned. So they've heard all my shit, and nothing's really a surprise. They know I'm gay. They know I'm Jewish. They know I'm from New York. They know I think all the corporations are criminal. They know my take. So I'm not really a blank slate for them. But I do try to make it a little bit more like an open mic. Like, hey, I'm trying some new shit, and all these other comics from around the country, they've got great stuff. But it used to make me nervous, but now I just have to write more and just be a little bit more playful and less precious with the material, because I have to also accept it's a hosting set.
What's a typical length of your hosting sets? You're doing 7, 10, 5?
Oh man, I feel bad. You said those numbers.
15, 30?
I give myself a tight 40, and then I let everybody else do 2. And I feel like that's fair. I'm doing a lot of work. You're
here from New York City, damn it. You Chattanooga kids have no idea.
On the sheet, it says 12. I probably do 14 or 15, but that's including hey, buy drinks and give it up for the bartenders. And all the paperwork, the business work, the busy work, that's included. But I would like to have the whole thing be 10, just because I don't need to be up there as much. It's really not for me. It's for everybody else. I
think it's fair to say it's for you. When somebody produces a show and puts in all that effort, one of the spoils, because usually it's not money, one of the spoils is stage time.
I get that.
You deserve that.
I get that, but for a guy that they've seen twice a month, and I'm also up at the Comedy Catch, there might be an element of less is more. And I do get benefits from the show that are not financial. I don't operate with spot trades, and I'm pretty clear about that. But if somebody's really good and they've been on my show, and if they think that I can contribute to their show, I would love to be on their show, but I never expect anything.
Sure.
Or I try not to. Sometimes the expectations sneak in. You have to remember that's just a demon. Like, you're not owed anything.
Right.
But I try to make it so that they can have really good sets, because I know going around the country, not every room is. I'm in rooms where I did a show the other day, 2 days ago, where people didn't know it was going to be a show. Their backs were to us, and the woman in the front row was in a wheelchair with her back to me. I'm like, you only have to turn one wheel to just face me. Like, just it would be so little effort for you just to spin, and face me. So I try to make an atmosphere for the comics to have a good time, and it's probably better for them to have more time than me.
I take it that show you're describing was not your show?
No. And I was happy to be on the show, but in the moment I was like, it's hard because,
yeah,
I mean, we all go through this. You work so hard and you're trying to do this thing that requires timing and silence and energy. And if the room is scattered and not focused, I mean, not every room's a comedy club.
Yeah.
Some rooms are chaotic places where there's pinball machines going on. So
sure. Ambush.
I hope it's to elevate out of those rooms,
Okay. Let's talk about spot trading a little bit. That hasn't come up in Always Bookin Comedy. My feeling on spot trading, I hate the idea. I hate the concept. I think it's bad for shows. Mm-hmm. You can tell. Sometimes I go to scenes and you can tell which comics clearly are show producers in the town. In fact, I'm almost confident enough to go up to them and be like, hey, next time I'm through, can I work your show? Not even knowing that they have a show.
Yeah, and there are certain people, there are certainly people who do things for me and I want to reciprocate and do things for them. And there are people who do things for the community and I want to do things for them. And I do think that those things should be, I think there's room for those things to be rewarded. It always depends on the lineup of the show. I like to make myself the weakest link on the show and book really great people. Yeah. And, there are people who I really admire here in Chattanooga, but they're simply not up enough to be at the level of the Atlanta comic or the New York comic, because who is up 2 or 3 times a day and writing. And so it's a balancing act of like, how strong is the rest of the lineup to accommodate someone who is maybe either from this town and new or from elsewhere and new, and including myself, who will balance out what I'm not capable of doing on stage.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't like the idea. There are people who hit me up and they're like, I'll give you a spot on my show if you give me a spot on my show. And it's just a really gross way to be approached.
Yeah, I haven't had it that direct. I've had close to that direct, and I wanted to be sick. Like the time it happened, I was like, this is not the way things should. Like, you should be booking the highest quality comics you can afford and are available, because really you're doing a service to like the whole country. The people in the audience, they might go to a different scene, go back to Cleveland or Detroit, and either want to go to a comedy show or not want to go to a comedy show. And the worst possible outcome is we lose an audience member for life because they went to a bad comedy show.
Yeah. But my show has usually 5 to 6 comics, sometimes 7, but it's pretty rare. So, and even great comics bomb or turn an audience off. So I feel like with that number of comics, and because I do try to book diverse points of view, there'll be at least 15 to 20 minutes that you like. And
Just wait more. 10 minutes. It will get better.
Yeah. It's like the weather in San Francisco, right? Just wait and it'll change if you don't like the comic.
Huh. So tell us a little bit more about how you got started running shows. Did you start running shows peak COVID, or did you wait a little bit?
No, peak COVID. So what happened was, I was doing a freelance writing assignment from the tiny Brooklyn apartment with no boyfriend, no pets, no roommate, no job. It was an isolating life. I had one person that I hung out with, which was this guy, Steve Malloy. He was a comic, and we do a lot of brand writing, like for ad agencies and stuff. And so we would be working together for this company called Humanot in Chattanooga. And we would check in every day on the Zoom, and each day we looked progressively worse. And he's like, hey, are you guys okay? And we're like, no, we're not. We're definitely not okay. It's not a great life. And he's like, well, I don't know what your views on the virus are, but if you want to come down to Chattanooga, I'll get you an apartment and we can put you on the payroll as comedians in residence for a month, and like just punch up the scripts that they did for brand content and come up with some new ideas around the brands that they had. And they were a really cool, fun, progressive company. And they were offering us an apartment. So we figured out where Chattanooga was, and then we rented a car. We drove here, and they put us in this hotel called the Bode Hotel in downtown Chattanooga. And after we were living in this half-empty hotel, and I became friends with the hotel manager, I'm like, hey, do you want me to like just do a comedy show in the lobby for the people trapped in the hotel? And so he let us use like the karaoke machine that they use as like a sound system. And we did a few shows, and they got bigger and bigger. And I went back to New York. I was actually on that show that Sam Morrell was tweeting about how there was a backyard show that it got pretty well known that how abusive we were all being treated, very abusively, physically at one point, by the people who owned this venue. We were in someone's backyard. And that was the last day. And the next morning I called the hotel manager. I'm like, how much was that apartment? And when he told me, I was like, can I rent it for 3 months to run a comedy show and house the New York comics in the other bedroom? It was a 2-bedroom apartment. And he said, yeah, you could do it for 3 months. And now it's been 3 years. I mean, the show only moved from the boat a couple of weeks ago because it got sold. But the show grew and grew, and the audiences grew, and the comics were so great that I decided just to sell my place in Brooklyn and move here and be a road comic. I get to do cities and states I never would have, and talk to types of people I never would have spoken to in New York.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, so many questions, and we're running out of time. So let me bring up 2 questions. My first one is in New York City, you use this very clever, creative way of like flash mobbing an audience. Probably doesn't work in Chattanooga. It sounds like you consistently get strong audiences. How are you doing that? What do you think some of the tricks are for?
Well, I mean, I do have an advertising background, so you needed a hook. And so it's called the Carpetbaggers Comedy Night, which, to those in the know that a carpetbagger is someone from the North who kind of infiltrated the South and kind of took advantage during Reconstruction. And that was kind of a little bit of my story. I was a guy from New York who took advantage of the openness of the South. And every show has a New York comic on it. So sometimes we have pretty famous comics on the lineup, but not usually. But the idea of a New York comic means something in people's minds emotionally, in their hearts, of like what that is. And there's also this hint of a mixing of the North and South. So I think that's enough of a hook for people to say, this feels like it might be different. Let's go check out what it is. It's only $12, and it's got a good word of mouth. Chattanooga is a small city and people talk. And I think we can, more often than not, we give people a good show. And so I think that's how we were able to keep an audience at the average audience has been 65 to 70. Last show we had was about 45 because we moved to a new space and it might take time to get back on track. But yeah,
do you find that summer it's harder to have?
Yeah, June is a really hard month in Chattanooga. The Comedy Catch is the big club in town, and they usually have 2 shows every Friday night. But in June they just do 1 because there's just too many free and large things to compete with.
Yeah. And it's hard when it's like beautiful out at 7:30 p.m. and you can have a beer on a patio. It's kind of a hard sell to like, oh, we got to go in a basement and watch some comedy right now. Or even worse, go in a ground floor with light streaming in.
Oh yeah. That's all the shows I've had recently when I go on the road. But I can't.
Can you give an example of a comic you're proud to have booked on your show?
Well, one of my favorite, there's so many favorites from New York who aren't like big names, but like Nick Zalelli, Jason Choi, Dan Pilzello, Eric Newman's been on the show numerous times. I was thrilled to have Steven Rogers and Caitlin.
Oh, I love Steven and Caitlin. They're both killers.
Together. Yeah, amazing. I've had Shane Torres and Sean Patton and Andy Sanford is one of my favorite writers and comics, and he's in Atlanta now, and he's been nice enough to come do the show. Nick Murphy, who is an absolute monster out of Atlanta, has done the show.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's been really great. Hans Kim, before he was the Hans Kim, and I knew him back in the day in New York.
What do you use for ticketing?
Eventbrite.
Okay, all right.
I think they charge a lot of money to the customer, but what can you do?
Yeah. All right, let's talk about road comedy. So now you're doing more road. Did you have a car in Brooklyn, or is having a car? No. Do you have a car now?
I do, and I shouldn't. Yeah.
You're not a good driver. Is that what you're saying?
I'm very bad.
What's the farthest you've driven? What's the longest away you've gone? Have you been down to like Southeast Florida?
I have, not me driving myself, because the comics know not to let me drive that long. But yeah, we've driven. We drove to Asheville from Chattanooga. Frequently to Atlanta, Nashville.
Is Asheville like Model Face? Is that what you're?
I haven't done Model Face. I've done Don't Tell Nashville, and I've done Zanies a whole bunch.
You said Nashville. I thought you said Asheville.
Oh no, Asheville. We did a really cool spot called the Girl and Goblin. It was like a tattoo/taxidermy shop. Okay. And so that was a super fun show.
Did you do the Nashville stuff with Brad Sativa?
Well, Brad and I used to produce a show. We had extended the Carpetbagger show to the Bode Nashville because the Bode had a location there.
Cool.
It kind of fizzled away, but Brad's great. I just saw him at Limestone, and he's obviously a killer.
Awesome. Were you part of Limestone, or were you just there?
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's a very prestigious festival. I hope that was your high and not your low, because I'd be.
Oh no, that's an absolute high. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I mean, everyone there was just so talented and wonderful. Yeah. People were nice, and
that's great.
It's a wonderful city, and Matt's great, and I mean, just very joyful experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. So any funny road stories now that you're getting out on the road?
Well, I remember it was like when I first got down here, I was out. We did a show in Huntsville. And after the show, this woman was like, "You want to see something you can't see in New York?" And I was like, "Maybe." And so she took me outside and she pointed at the moon. She goes, "What do you think that is there next to the moon?" And I'm like, I knew what it was. It was Venus. And I was like, "Oh, it's Venus." She goes, "No, it's Pluto." And I go, I don't think there's ever a possibility for you to see Pluto with the naked eye. She goes, "No, it's Pluto. Pluto used to be a planet, but now it's a star." And I said, "Well, that's just not how it works." I go, "Planets don't become stars." I go, "One's a gas body, one's a solid body." But there was some discrepancy about, debate about the status of Pluto, about a rock or a planet. She goes, "No, that's Pluto." And I was just being a dick because I was new here and I shouldn't have been. But I was like, "You don't teach in the area, do you?" And she's like, "No, why would you ask me that?" I'm like, "Well, because I think if you had like a third grade science education, you know that there's no way you could see Pluto without a telescope, even with a telescope, sometimes not." And she's like, "Y'all rude. Y'all from New York are rude." I'm like, "No, that's just science being rude. Don't put that on me. That's just facts that are rude." But yeah, that was a weird experience. And I'm like, and then when people don't get a joke, I'm like, well, if they think you can see Pluto, maybe it's not the best filter if the comedy was good. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
You're like, "Man, that audience loved me." And then you're like, "I don't love this audience."
Well, that would be, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's even worse when they love you and then you find out they don't know what 2 and 2 is. I'm like,
Oh,
what did you
geez.
like?
Do you, when you go on the road, do you sell merch?
I just started selling merch. What sucks is I had merch and then a more famous comic started doing the same joke. And so, yeah, it happens. So the merch had to go away.
Stickers, t-shirts?
It was a bumper sticker that said "COVID killed millions, still no parking." And I sold a few of those.
Yeah.
And I have this bit about the inability of this country or the left to ever have any kind of real sensible gun control. And part of the joke is the best we're ever going to get is maybe bullets that have a warning label that say, "Warning, these bullets were manufactured in a facility that also processes peanuts." And because I do in the beginning of the bit, it's about we've been able to remove peanuts from every place where children are, but we still have guns. So I have a box. It's a T-shirt with a box of bullets with that warning label on it. And I've sold a few. I've sold a bunch through just like having it on my website and people just buy it on demand from like, Etsy. And I've sold a few at some shows, but I have a whole box of them.
So how does that work?
I don't feature, like I think that's really like a headliner thing. And sometimes when I feature, it's just on the place where merch is acceptable. But, I'm starting to get more.
Yeah, I'll say this. I do a mixture of headlining feature. I mean, I'll do anything. I'll do an open mic in a basement bar. I'll do 3 minutes and wait 3 hours. I'm not above anything, but like in a couple weeks, I'm lucky enough. I'm headlining at Stir Crazy Comedy Club in Glendale, Arizona. So I will bring merch. I will sell that merch.
What's your
and when
merch?
I'm featuring, I will always ask the headliner, "Is it okay to sell merch?" And I've almost never had anybody say no. And recently, I've had like 3 headliners in a row say, "I would be crazy to say no to you. There's no way to make a living as a feature if you're not selling merch." And then the reality is, it is a much longer conversation. We're not gonna have time for it, but it's very difficult to sell merch as a feature. If you get up and you do 20 or 30 minutes and then somebody's doing 45 to an hour, they don't remember you at all. Like people can't remember jokes that they loved 20 minutes later. They're not remembering the feature usually. But if you do especially well, you can tell at the merch table.
Yeah. That could be a lonely drive home too, though.
Yeah. Oh, that's the worst. Or if you're lucky enough to be flying, if you have to pay to fly back merch, that is just.
Yeah. John Marco Ceresi has a great idea. He makes towels because you don't need multiple sizes. So
that's cool. Yeah, I'm very anti t-shirt. I think t-shirts are the worst form of merch.
What do you like?
Just from a business perspective, it's too easy to say no. Like when you're selling your stuff, it's like, oh, it's the wrong size, it's the wrong color, whatever. There's so many reasons to say no to it. But
what do you prefer?
Stickers. Stickers are I talk your ear off about.
Do you put jokes on the stickers? So the joke.
What I do that I will say I do well is when I reveal my stickers at the end of my set. Not even 9 out of 10, 98 out of 100 times, I get an applause break when I reveal the sticker. And it's from like a joke half an hour ago. People go nuts. They go crazy. And so I always know I'm going to do well tonight.
So it's like a physical callback. you know?
Yes, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's
Great.
like almost like a catchphrase, but it's not a catchphrase. It's just like a word or two from a punchline or a physical. I'm trying very hard not to say exactly what it is, because I never do. Like I never post pictures of them because I mean I'm hoping I'm selling these things like 5 years from now. Like I don't. I always want them to feel fresh. But
I appreciate that. I respect it.
There's a real art to it. Like when I do those jokes, I have 3 specific pieces of merch that all tie to jokes. And when I do an hour-long set, I'll do the jokes at like 20, 40, maybe 50 kind of thing. And when I do those jokes, unlike any other joke in my act, I'm really selling those. Like I need those jokes to land and do especially well and be memorable. And I just treat them differently. It's like in color versus black and white. And then so at the end, when I show that I have a sticker, people remember those jokes and they're astonished that there's an actual piece.
And those jokes always do go well, right? For the most part.
No.
Oh, they don't?
No. One of them always goes well. That's my
Do
big.
You call an audible and then not pitch the merch if the
sometimes.
Joke...
Yeah, I've done that. Because like one of them's a little dirtier, like off brand for me. And so sometimes when that doesn't go well, I'm just too humiliated and embarrassed to let people know. Because I know like half the audience like look down on me for telling that joke. And so I don't want to like double down on that by saying, hey, I got 150 of these things printed.
Yeah, aren't you like the second cleanest comic?
I'm the Colorado's second cleanest comedian.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
Because of that one joke? Is that the joke that slipped you to number 2?
Well, that's another funny thing. Like a lot of sets, I sell a lot of those stickers, but a lot of shows I won't even do that joke. Like I have to make a real judgment call. Like, you know, I'm doing like a church thing in a couple of weeks. I'm definitely not doing that joke. I'm not going to sell merch at that event. It's a weird corporate thing. But at some gigs, I have to like make a determination. Can I do this PG-13 joke so that I can sell the merch so I can put gas in my car, or I have to skip it, you know? And then I have one of the other merch jokes. I have 2 different versions of it. Like the one that always hits super hard and the one that's a little more clean. And I'll still sell the merch, but it won't make quite as big an impact with the audience the way I tell it the clean way. Gotcha. Anyways, we're out of time, Jeff. This is really fun, and
thank you so much.
It was an honor to have a Limestone comic on this. That's a really cool accomplishment. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a real thrill, and thank you for inviting me, man. I'd love to talk to you anytime. Yeah, awesome, Jeff. Thanks again to Mark, who had a let's just throw this out here. He really liked you, Mark, in North Carolina. Oh, thank you, Mark.
Some other comment. Ironic.
Hey, just go to thatguyimet.com and you can find all my socials there. So if you
thatguyimet.com, everybody. This is Always Bookin Comedy. Every Monday it's live on YouTube and Twitch. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, brother.
Shut this.